The Speaking Statements, the podcast of statements about the 50 U.S. states. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell for alerts for when a new episode is released.
Hello, listeners. Welcome to our Wyoming episode of Speaking Statements. We have a guest here from Yellowstone to talk about Wyoming. If you ever heard Yellowstone National Park. I want to introduce Trudy Patton, who works at Yellowstone National Park, to be on my podcast. Hi, Trudy.
Hi, Julian. It's so nice to be talking to you today from Yellowstone. I'm excited to tell you a little bit about the park as well as about Wyoming.
Oh yeah. My first question is, can you tell me about the mud pots in Yellowstone?
I can. We actually have 4 different kinds of thermal features here in Yellowstone. The most basic of those 4 types of thermal features is a hot spring. So a hot spring is a pool of hot water that can basically stay in balance. All the water that wants to turn to steam can get to the surface and turn to steam. We also have geysers, and geysers are like hot springs, except they have a constriction or a small opening in their plumbing system. And that causes the pressure to build up below the surface, and geysers erupt into the air. And then they'll take a break as that heat and water and pressure are all building up again, and then they'll have another eruption. Fumaroles are again like hot springs, except they don't have very much water, so it's just the steam or water vapor that gets to the surface, and sometimes you'll hear a hissing sound with them. And the kind that you're interested in, the mud pots, again, are very similar to the hot springs, except they're a little bit acidic. So the acid breaks down some of the clays and the soils that are around it, and you get bubbling or popping of that mud. And sometimes they smell bad too. So some people don't like to be around the mud pots because they're kind of stinky, but I think it's kind of cool that they smell bad and that they give these bubbling and popping noises. We are just past the 4th of July. Do you like the 4th of July holiday?
Yeah, except I don't get to see the fireworks.
Oh, sometimes you still have to go to bed too early to see those fireworks. But in a couple years, you'll be old enough to stay up and watch the fireworks. When you're around fireworks, sometimes people even have stink bombs, which have some hydrogen sulfide in them, and they smell kind of bad. That's kind of what the mud pots smell like. So it reminds some people of the 4th of July. It's also kind of the smell that you would get with a rotten egg, so for some people it reminds them of rotten eggs as well.
Sounds like a very stinky volcano with that a speeded up one in fast mode.
Oh, yeah. The reason that we have the mud pots here is because there is a volcano underneath Yellowstone. And that magma chamber, that molten lava below the surface, is what heats up the water that you find in all the thermal or hydrothermal features in the park.
My second question is, what kind of foods are commonly eaten in Wyoming?
People in Wyoming eat all kinds of different foods. Some foods that are popular in Wyoming are beef and bison and elk and deer, but lots of people like to eat fish here too, like trout. Many people will also make jam or preserves to put like on biscuits out of choke cherries or huckleberries, which are 2 of the wild berries that grow here in Wyoming.
Good answer. My third question is, why do you think people should visit Wyoming?
Wyoming is a very cool place to visit. There is so much open space. In fact, almost half of the state is publicly owned land. So there's lots of places to go hiking or camping or fishing or hunting or horseback riding. You can even dig for fossils in Wyoming. There are so many outdoor things that you can do in the state of Wyoming, besides going to towns and visiting museums there, or lots of people like to come to Wyoming and watch the rodeo as well.
Yes. My fourth question is, what's your favorite thing to do in Wyoming outside of Yellowstone?
Mm-hmm. Yellowstone is definitely my favorite place in Wyoming. It's where I work, so I really like spending time in Yellowstone. But just south of Yellowstone, there's another national park too called the Grand Tetons. And it's also a very cool place to visit. There's big, tall mountain peaks there and several lakes and rivers. And one of my favorite things to do when I go to the Tetons is find a quiet spot, hiking down a trail a little ways away from everyone else, and finding a spot to sit by a river or a stream and listen to the birds and the sounds of nature.
Well, it's a good answer. My fifth question is, and I'm sure you'll have a long answer for this one. What kind of animals are in Wyoming?
There are so many animals in Yellowstone, but in Wyoming too. There are bison and bears, both grizzly bears and black bears. There are moose and deer and elk and fish and bighorn sheep and pronghorn and fox and coyotes and wolves and bald eagles. There are marmots and river otters and weasels and trumpeter swans. But probably one of my favorite animals in Wyoming is a really small animal that lots of people don't even get to see. It's called a pika, and it's about the size of a big mouse, and it likes to live in scree slopes, so areas that are kind of rocky, because the pika doesn't like it when the temperatures get over 76 degrees Fahrenheit. So it can go underneath those rocks, and it's like a little cave and can cool off there. The pikas are sometimes called haymakers because they don't hibernate in the winter, and they end up stacking up different kinds of vegetation all summer long to dry out, so they have enough food to make it all the way through the winter.
Whoa.
They're a pretty cool little animal.
Yeah. Well, I'm done with my questions for now. We were glad to have you here to talk about Wyoming and Yellowstone. Bye.
Bye, Julian. I hope you learned a little bit about Yellowstone and about Wyoming, and I hope that you have a chance to visit Yellowstone and other national parks as you are learning about all the different states.
Bye.
Bye.
Now we'll do my notes about Wyoming. It borders 6 states, which are Montana, South Dakota, Nebraska, Idaho, Utah, and Colorado. It became a state in 1890 and was the 44th state. The capital and the largest city is Cheyenne. Casper and Laramie are the next largest cities. Yellowstone National Park is in Wyoming. It's possible it's the first national park in the world. It's known for Old Faithful, which is a geyser and its wildlife. Wyoming had the first governor who was a woman. Her name was Nellie Taylor Ross. It was also the first state to give women the right to vote. Buford, Wyoming was the smallest town in the U.S. It had only one resident until 2013. Now it's for the hot facts of Leo. Show us what you got, Leo. What is the state tea? It would be the Plains cottonwood. What is the state flower? It's the Indian paintbrush. What is the state bird? That would be the meadowlark. What is the state fish? It would be the cutthroat trout. What is the state mammal? That is the bison. What is the state reptile? It's the horned toad. What's the state sport? The state sport is rodeo. What is a state coin? It's the second golden dollar coin. What is the state butterfly? It's the Sharon's green hair streak. Thanks for tuning in Fast Facts. We love having you on my podcast. And last but not least, we have the Wyoming Quarter, which are words to say the quality, and a bucking bronco. That's all for today. But check in next week for season 4. It's going to be a good episode. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Speaking Statements.